I'm Ava Hartley, 33, and the day started with the ringtone my mother loves from an old country station, the one she used to hum while stirring Sunday chili. I answered on speaker, a spreadsheet open on my laptop, and my knee tucked under me in my office chair. She sounded bright, almost sparkling, and said she had good news about Ryan buying that stone front Tudor in Maple Ridge, the neighborhood where I'd lost a bidding war last spring. When I asked how she said they'd helped a bit, then named $85,000 as if it were a casserole on the table. She called me independent like a compliment and a dismissal layered together. As she spoke, a bank alert slid across my screen about someone trying to access a closed joint account, an account I'd used years ago to cover Dad's medical bills. I told her I had to get back to work and set the phone down, the room a notch quieter than it had been a minute earlier. The numbers on my spreadsheet were still there, but the math behind my family had changed. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you've ever been called independent, right before someone took advantage of your kindness. I grew up in a blue house on the edge of town, where the furnace rattled in winter and the kitchen window faced a maple that blazed red each October. Dad worked with his hands and came home with sawdust on his sleeves. Mom kept a neat ledger and a tidy garden. I bagged groceries after school and learned to stretch every dollar until it made sense. Our stories were simple: then work hard, be fair, share what you have. When I was old enough, I put those lessons into a little company with my name on the LLC papers and a desk that doubled as a dining table, advising clinics on how to make systems kinder for patients and smarter for budgets. The first time a client paid an invoice on time, I printed it and stuck it on the fridge like a report card. The first time a hospital renewed a contract, I paid my parents' property taxes without blinking. It felt right to help, like returning a favor life had handed me. Maple Ridge was a different world: brick sidewalks, copper gutters that caught the sun, porches wrapped in white railings that looked freshly painted year-round. I'd walked through a Tudor there last spring, high ceilings, a study with built-ins, 2 maples arched over a stone path, and wrote an offer that didn't hold. When I lost that house, I told myself it was a sign to wait, to stand back while the market cooled. Hearing my brother would call it home with my parents' help tasted like biting into a beautiful apple and finding a bruise inside. I didn't want what was his. I wanted what was fair. The word independent kept circling like a bird that refused to land. I could have pushed the feeling aside and carried on, but the alert about the closed account sat in my inbox like a small flashing light. Years ago, when Dad's insurance lapsed and the hospital bills arrived in envelopes too thick to ignore, I opened a joint account to keep track of every payment and every promise. When the crisis passed, I closed it and filed the paperwork with the same care I use for clients' dates, signatures, confirmations. If someone tried to find a key to a door I'd locked, it meant they remembered exactly which door it was. I set my phone on the desk and turned a silver frame face down the Christmas photo where we all wore red sweaters, and I stood with my arm around my mother. The glass made a soft sound against the wood. Work steadied me the way it always does, numbers lining up tasks, completed voices in meetings moving from problem to solution. But in the quiet parts of the day, my mind went back to a different kind of ledger tuition money I'd turned down because Mom said they were tight this month, the watch I'd bought Dad on a lean December because I wanted his smile, the trips my brother posted with captions about finding balance. I'd been taught to be generous without keeping score. I had never been taught what to do when the people you loved started adding up your generosity for you. There is a difference between being self-reliant and being treated like a bottomless well. By midweek, messages were flying about Sunday brunch, the usual pot roast, the good plate Sam bringing a pecan pie from the bakery on 3rd. I said I'd be there and put my phone face down again. The maple outside my apartment had started to turn at the tips, a few leaves going early amber, and the air held that faint snap that makes you check the thermostat at night. I told myself it was just a meal, just family, just a table I knew as well as my own palm. I told myself I would smile and ask about the house and keep my hands still in my lap when money came up. On Sunday, the sun was bright enough to make the patio stones glow, and the dining room smelled like Mom's roast and rosemary. Ryan bounded in with plans for copper accents and a roof just to be safe. Dad poured tea like it was a holiday, and Sam joked about how many times they'd already driven by the new place. I offered to take a group photo, angled the phone for the light, and caught a notification at the top of the screen, just a family thread. I didn't recognize a name that made the room tighten around me for a second. My finger slipped, and the thread opened. The laughter at the table softened to a hum. I held my breath and read a line I wasn't meant to see. The phone was warm in my hand as I held it above the table, trying to steady the frame and catch everyone in the light. Dad leaned in toward Ryan, his hand resting on Sam's shoulder, as if they were already a family of 3. Mom's pearls caught the sun, and her smile stretched as if the camera were the only audience that mattered. I pressed the shutter, heard the soft click, then went to take another. A notification dropped across the top of the screen, just a family group thread I didn't recognize. My finger brushed it by mistake, and the messages opened before I could close them. The words ran down the screen in quick fragments. Dad had written about the closing on Ryan's house, calling it a triumph against out-of-towners who drove up prices. Ryan had joked that the family who outbid them last year had moved away. Then Mom had chimed in, reminding Dad to check an old account of mine before I noticed. The account I'd closed. Another line, Ryan's name this time, Little Miss Independent won't even realize. She's too busy consulting to look. And Sam's reply, family takes care of family. I handed the phone back, my fingers stiff from gripping too tightly. Perfect shots, I said, though my throat felt tight. I slid into my chair again, the space at my end of the table wider than it needed to be. The others sat close elbows, brushing, voices rising in comfortable rhythm. The sound of their laughter seemed to stay on one side, leaving me with the scrape of my fork against the plate. Ryan leaned forward, excitement written in the way he tapped the table with his knuckles. I'm thinking of redoing the roof right away, he said. The inspector said it has 5 years left, but why risk it? Copper trim, maybe even architectural shingles. Sam lit up, her voice rising to meet his. That's going to look incredible. What was it, 18,000? I set my glass down carefully, measuring each word before letting them out. That's a lot to take on. How are you planning to cover it with your landscaping work? The question was plain steady, not sharp, but the air at the table shifted. Mom folded her napkin into neat squares, her spine suddenly straighter. Why are you always so aggressive, Ava? She asked, her tone clipped. Dad set his fork down with careful precision, each movement deliberate. That tone isn't becoming. It's hard on men when women talk about money like that. Ryan snorted into his drink, his grin sliding sideways. There she goes again, counting every penny. Some of us don't want to live like accountants. Mom gave a quick nod, her eyes flicking to Sam. We'll help with the landscaping. The yard has so much potential, especially with those maples. Sam reached across the table and squeezed Mom's hand. Your parents helped with my student loans too. We don't know what we'd do without them. Her words landed gently, but they left a mark all the same. My phone buzzed against the wood of the table. I glanced down and saw a name I hadn't in years. Chelsea, a cousin who had walked out of family gatherings after a dispute about Grandma's estate and hadn't come back. The message was brief. We need to talk about Florida. Before I could form a reply, another buzz came, this one from Lauren, my attorney. Found forged signatures on timeshare sale. Call me immediately. The door opened, and Maddie stepped in with a quiet confidence that belonged more in a boardroom than a dining room. She carried a manila folder, her posture as straight as if she were presenting to clients. Sorry to interrupt brunch, but these needed your signature right away. Her eyes flicked to mine with a look I knew well, steady, supportive, unspoken. Mom's voice jumped half an octave. You brought work to brunch, Ava. This is exactly the problem. If you keep putting business before family, we'll have to think twice about inviting you to the holidays. Dad's brow furrowed, and he leaned forward. This attitude of yours is tearing us apart. Your brother never does this. Ryan smirked over his glass, his words casual but pointed. Maybe if you weren't so calculating all the time, you'd have a husband by now, someone willing to put up with you. I took the folder from Maddie, my hands steady in a way they hadn't been minutes before. Thank you, I said, rising from the table. My voice carried calm and even. I stepped toward the hallway and my phone buzzed again in my pocket. Lauren's message this time was short and sharp. Documents received. This is worse than we thought. I closed the bathroom door and leaned against the cool counter, my reflection steady in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She was clear-eyed, her shoulders straightening with a decision she hadn't voiced yet. I opened the folder Maddie had handed me. Inside were 15 years of family financial records, carefully highlighted and tabbed. A sticky note clung to the first page in Maddie's handwriting. "You didn't imagine it. It's all here." The sound of laughter from the dining room floated faintly through the door, muffled by distance and walls. I set my hand flat on the papers, the edges sharp beneath my palm. A thought formed sharper than any of their words at the table, clearer than the label they'd stamped on me for years. Would I keep letting them call my independence an excuse while reaching into my accounts? Or would I finally stop the hand before it reached again? I folded the papers back into the envelope and turned toward the door, the answer already waiting in the firmness of my step. The call came close to midnight, Ryan's name glowing on the screen in the dark of my bedroom. I thought about letting it ring, but by the third tone I pressed answer. His voice came fast, edged with panic. The inspector had found black mold in the attic, and he needed $18,000 for remediation before the bank would allow the closing. He said it was only temporary, a quick loan I could cover without trouble. I walked into the kitchen and set a glass beneath the faucet, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between us. "That's a significant amount," I said, steadying my tone. "What did the bank suggest?" He admitted they wouldn't extend the loan so late in the process. His voice softened, almost pleading, as he told me Mom and Dad had suggested I was the best option, that I had money from a healthcare contract. The microwave clock read 12:17. I set the glass down on the counter. "I can't help you, Ryan." He was quiet for a beat, then his tone hardened. "You mean you won't? This is Family Ava." The words lingered after I ended the call. I blocked his number before the next ring could start. By morning, 3 voicemails from Mom waited in my inbox, each one heavier than the last. She couldn't understand why I was being so difficult about helping Ryan, why I was making things harder for everyone. She ended with a sigh about how family supports family. I deleted them all and drove to my office downtown. The city sky was clear, the towers shining in the late morning sun, but the air around me felt heavier than it should have. Maddie met me at the elevator with a coffee in one hand and an expression that carried worry. "Your 10 o'clock canceled," she said softly, "but your parents are in the conference room." I stopped in my tracks. "What they showed up 20 minutes ago, said it was urgent. Your Kensington clients will be here in less than an hour." She handed me the coffee. I told them they had 15 minutes. I stepped into the room to find Mom rising from her chair, arms open. Dad stayed seated, his eyes scanning the walls as though calculating the square footage. "Darling, we've been worried," Mom said. Her perfume reached me before she did. I stayed where I was. "What's so urgent?" Dad cleared his throat. "It's about Ryan's house. The inspection uncovered some problems." "I know," I said. "He called me last night. Then you understand why we need your help." Mom laid her hand on mine where it rested on the back of a chair. I pulled away slowly. "We've already given him so much. It's just this last repair," Small Dad added, as if the word could reshape the number. 18,000 isn't small," I replied. Dad used my full name, the one that carried weight when I was a child. "Ava Marie, your brother needs help." "And I needed help last spring when I lost the house he's now buying with your money," I answered. "You told me to be patient, that the market would turn." Silence filled the room. Then Maddie appeared at the door, calm as ever. "Miss Hartley, your Kensington clients are in the lobby." I nodded to her and turned back. "I have work to do." Their smiles tightened as they promised to figure something out. I watched them leave, wondering how many times before I had been pulled into a conversation like this and how many times I had given in. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with an alert. I excused myself from the meeting and opened the notification. Unusual activity had been flagged on a Visa account in my name. I had never opened it. The rest of the afternoon blurred into calls and forms. A credit card with nearly $10,000 in charges at home improvement stores, vacation photos from a lake I had never visited, a collection agency claiming I was co-signer on Ryan's truck loan. The signature on the paperwork was mine, but not mine. "This is a clear pattern," Lauren said when I finally reached her. Her voice was measured professional, as though she had heard cases like this before. "Bring everything tomorrow morning, and Ava, change your locks tonight." I hung up just as Maddie entered, holding a thick envelope. "Chelsea called while you were on the phone," she said. "She asked me to give you this by hand." Inside was a stack of notarized papers showing a timeshare sold 3 years ago. My signature appeared across the transfer, but it wasn't mine. Behind it was a copy of my grandparents' will, a section highlighted naming a separate inheritance meant for me, money I had never seen. The phone rang again. Lauren's voice was firm. "I've reviewed what you sent. This isn't just family borrowing too much. This crosses into criminal territory." I set the papers on my desk and noticed the receipt tucked into a drawer, the one for the platinum watch I had given Dad the Christmas before. $750 more than I should have spent, but I had wanted to see him happy. A return slip was attached, dated the day after showing the amount exchanged for store credit in his name. That evening I met Chelsea in a coffee shop across town. She looked older, sharper than when I'd last seen her, but her eyes carried the same steady spark. "They did the same thing to me," she said as soon as we sat down. I questioned why Uncle Martin handled Grandma's estate when he wasn't executor. Suddenly I was the one with problems. Mom told everyone I was unstable, how much I asked, about $40,000 that I can prove. From you, she slid another folder across the table, almost $300,000 over 10 years. The air between us seemed to narrow. "Where did you get this?" Aunt Ruth left her email open on my laptop one Thanksgiving. "I've been gathering evidence since." Her voice was even unflinching. "They've been selling off property with our names still on the deeds." That afternoon, Lauren called again. "We'd like to take your case pro bono," she said, her tone touched with something more than formality. "You aren't alone in this." Later that night, Ruth, my old mentor, advised me to put everything in order. Packets for each person, she said. Chronological, clear, no emotion, just facts. Maddie stayed late 3 nights in a row, color-coding years of documents into neat stacks. She sealed the last envelope and looked at me. "You know this means war." "No," I said, closing the binder labeled Family Ledger. "It means justice." I sent a certified letter requesting a family meeting at my office that Saturday. They tried to reschedule 3 times. I stayed firm. Ryan called Thursday night, his words slurred with drink and anger. "You need to stop harassing everyone. Mom's blood pressure is through the roof because of you." "I'll see you Saturday at 10, I answered and hung up. When he called again 6 times in a row, I blocked him too. Friday evening, Maddie helped arrange the room-setting water glasses in neat lines, notepads at each chair. I opened a drawer and pulled out a leather-bound binder I had kept for years labeled Family Karma Audit. Maddie's eyes widened at the rows of receipts and transfers inside. "You've been keeping track all along." "Yes," I said, "and it's time they see it." I closed the binder with a soft snap, the sound steady in the quiet room. They'll have one chance to make this right. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of the mirror and studied the woman looking back. The circles beneath my eyes told the story of nights spent sorting files, but the line of my shoulders was straight. There was no trace of hesitation in the set of my mouth. I had always carried the name Independent, like it was carved into me by someone else's hand. That morning it felt different. Maddie had come by early, balancing a tray of coffee and folders under her arm. She moved through the office with quiet purpose, setting out notepads and arranging the chairs with the same precision she brought to client presentations. The stack of evidence packets sat ready, each sealed with a paperclip and labeled by name. She set her hand briefly on my arm. "Everything is in order," she said. Lauren arrived next, her leather briefcase in one hand, her expression calm but firm. She laid out copies of affidavits, bank statements, and the forged documents Chelsea had uncovered. "We don't need speeches," she said evenly. "We need facts. Let the papers speak." By mid-morning, the conference table gleamed under the recessed lights, every chair in its place. Water glasses caught the light, and the folders sat in neat stacks like silent witnesses. I pulled out the binder I had hidden away for years, the one marked Family Karma Audit. The edges of the pages were worn from my hands, but the numbers inside were sharp as ever. Nearly $300,000 over 15 years. Every loan, every withdrawal, every signature, nothing was forgotten. Chelsea arrived a little before 10, her eyes steady as she placed her own folder beside mine. They'll deny everything she said, but this time they won't have room to hide. Her voice carried no bitterness, just certainty. The sound of the doorbell reached us, and Maddie went to let them in. Mom walked in first, her pearl bracelet glinting in the light, her expression arranged into something halfway between worry and confidence. Dad followed, moving slower than usual, his eyes darting around the office, as though cataloging what everything might be worth. Ryan trailed behind his jaw-set Sam at his side with lips pressed tightly together. "Thank you for coming," I said, motioning toward their chairs. My voice was steady, low enough to leave no room for question. "We have a lot to address today." Mom gave a quick laugh, too high-pitched to feel natural. "Really, Ava, all this formality. We could have just talked at home." "This isn't a chat," I answered. I slid the first folder across the table. "This is an accounting of the financial support I've given over the years." Dad's eyes flicked down to the total at the bottom. His face paled. Mom's hands fluttered at her pearls, twisting them until the strand looked ready to break. Ryan pushed the paper aside with a snort. "Ridiculous. You've been keeping score all this time?" "Apparently I was the only one not counting," I said. Lauren distributed the remaining folders, her tone clipped but professional. "Each of you has a copy. The records are thorough and documented." I picked up the remote and pressed a button. The screen on the wall lit up with security footage from the bank. Ryan's figure appeared, sliding my identification across the counter, his signature looping across the page. The room fell silent. Sam's eyes darted from the screen to Ryan, her hands folding into her lap. Mom's voice came out in a whisper, practiced and trembling. "After all we've done for you, how can you turn on us like this?" Dad leaned back, his expression a blank mask. "I don't recall any of this. My memory isn't what it used to be." Ryan pushed his chair back sharply. "I'm not sitting here while you attack Mom and Dad. Everyone's going to hear about how you're treating them." I pressed another button, and his voice filled the room from a recorded call. "All you have to do is mention Dad's medical bills, and Ava writes another check. She's so busy working, she never notices when a little extra disappears." The words cut through the room like glass. Ryan froze, his mouth opening and closing before he turned toward the door. Lauren stepped neatly into his path. "I suggest you sit," she said. Chelsea opened her folder and spread her documents across the table. "Here are the records of the Florida timeshare sale. These signatures were forged. The handwriting analysis confirms it." Dad's hands clenched around the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning white. Mom's mascara smudged as she reached for a tissue. "We never meant—" "You meant exactly this," I interrupted. "The messages planning to check my account before I noticed her here. They speak for themselves." Sam stood suddenly, her chair scraping the floor. "I didn't know. Ryan told me Ava approved those loans." She turned to him, her face pale with anger. "You lied." When he reached for her, she pulled away. "Don't touch me." She grabbed her purse and walked to the door. Lauren moved aside, and the sound of the latch echoed in the silence she left behind. The room no longer looked like family gathered for a meal. It looked like strangers caught in a light too bright to escape. Mom cried into her tissue. Dad stared at the table, and Ryan searched their faces for someone to step in. I closed the binder with a deliberate snap. "You'll have one chance to make this right." Lauren placed 2 sealed envelopes in the center of the table. Option 1, repayment with interest over 5 years. Option 2, criminal complaints for fraud, forgery, and identity theft. They are ready to be filed. No one moved. The sound of the clock ticking in the hallway seemed louder than their breathing. At last, Mom reached for a pen, her hands shaking. Dad followed with stiff movements. Ryan hesitated, then leaned forward. The scratch of their signatures marked the page. Ryan pulled a stack of cards from his wallet and laid them face down. "These have your name on them," he muttered. Dad's voice was low, almost flat. "We'll need to sell the house. And the membership. Maybe the boat." Chelsea's voice broke the silence. "And the Florida property." The one left to me and Ava. Mom's head snapped up. "How did you—" "Public records," Chelsea replied calmly. Dad signed the last page with a quick, heavy stroke. "We'll figure something out." When the room finally emptied, only Maddie remained quietly collecting glasses and straightening chairs. I looked down at the signatures still drying on the page. "They signed," I said. Maddie placed her hand on my shoulder. "Of course they did. They finally saw you." The light through the office windows had shifted, casting long shadows across the table. For the first time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt clear. The house felt too quiet after they left the silence, carrying a weight that pressed against the walls. I stayed at the table for a long time, tracing the edge of the signed agreements with one finger. Their signatures were their proof that the truth had finally been acknowledged, but the air still held the echo of everything unsaid. Maddie moved softly through the room, gathering glasses and folding the napkins with her usual precision. She paused behind me and set a hand lightly on my shoulder. "It's done," she said. I nodded, though my chest felt tight with something harder to name. That night, I sat on the floor of my office with the binder open across my lap. Every receipt, every transfer, every forged document stared back at me like a ledger written in 2 columns, what was taken and what was left behind. I had spent years carrying this record in silence, telling myself it wasn't the right time to confront it. Now the evidence lay in the open, and for the first time I understood that silence had cost me more than money. I slid the binder back into its place, closed the drawer, and turned the key. The next morning began like any other, but the rhythm of my day felt altered. I walked into the office with a straight spine, the kind that didn't yield at the thought of who might be waiting. Maddie handed me my schedule, and when she asked if I wanted the usual gap held open for unexpected visitors, I shook my head. "Not anymore," I said. The line between work and family had always blurred. Now it was clear. Later that afternoon, Mom's number flashed on my phone. The call rolled to voicemail, then another followed, and another. I let them all sit unanswered. By evening, Ryan tried again from a different number, his voice slipping onto my voicemail sharp with anger. He said I had humiliated them, that I had twisted everything to look like betrayal. I listened once, deleted it, and blocked the number too. Lauren called to check in that night. "They'll test the boundary," she said evenly. "It's what people do when they've relied on someone too long. The test isn't theirs, Ava. It's yours." Her words were measured, but they carried weight. Over the next week, small signs arrived like pieces of a pattern. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years sent a message asking if I was really taking legal action. An old neighbor forwarded me a post where Ryan called me ungrateful. Invitations that once came by habit stopped arriving. The circle I had thought of as family seemed to shrink overnight. I wrote each name down in a notebook, not to keep score, but to remember where the lines had been drawn. One evening I met Ruth at a quiet cafe downtown. She had mentored me through my first contract years ago and knew more of my history than most. She listened without interrupting as I told her what had unfolded. When I finished, she reached across the table and set her hand over mine. "You've already done the hardest part," she said. "Now you decide how you'll carry the rest of it. Facts are facts, but what you do with them, that's where your power is." Her words lingered as I walked back to my car. For so long I had answered every demand, every call for help, as if it were my duty. Now I understood the difference between duty and choice. That weekend I pulled open a drawer in my office and found the stack of holiday cards I had saved over the years. They were filled with the same phrases family always sticks together. "Thank you for everything, you're so strong." I laid them out across the desk, then one by one fed them into the shredder. The hum of the machine filled the room, each strip falling into the bin like a quiet severing. When the last card was gone, the surface of the desk looked clearer than it had in years. Maddie stopped by later with a stack of client files. She noticed the empty corner where the cards had sat. "Feels lighter in here," she said. I smiled faintly, the first one in days. It was a small act, almost invisible compared to the confrontation, but it felt like the first true step of resistance. I had drawn a line that couldn't be crossed again. That night, I slept without my phone by the bed. No midnight calls. No alerts pulling me awake. Just quiet. In the morning, sunlight spread across the floorboards, and the weight between my shoulders was gone. I brewed coffee and opened the newspaper, the ordinary rhythm of the day, holding steady. But even in that steadiness, I knew the story wasn't finished. Paperwork alone couldn't close what had been opened. By Monday, a certified letter arrived at my office, the envelope thick with folded pages. Inside was a note in my mother's handwriting pleading for another conversation, asking me to reconsider what she called family matters. I placed the letter in a file marked correspondence and locked it away without answering. I had chosen the silence this time, not as avoidance, but as boundary. And that choice, more than anything else, felt like the beginning of freedom. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but beneath it, movement stirred. Ryan tried once more from an unknown number, his voice unsteady, demanding. I stopped what he called attacks on the family. I ended the call without response. A few hours later, Lauren confirmed what I had already begun to sense my parents and Ryan weren't finished. The agreements they had signed weren't acceptance, they were delay. On Thursday evening, Maddie and I sat at my dining table, papers spread across the polished wood. The repayment contract, the evidence packets, the notes from Lauren, all of it lay in neat stacks. I felt the old weight of being the one who smoothed chaos into order, but this time I wasn't smoothing anything for them. Friday afternoon, as the last light of the day faded through my office windows, the intercom buzzed. Maddie's voice carried across the line. Your mother is here, she said. And she isn't alone. My pulse steadied. Show them in. Janet walked in first, her coral lipstick flawless, her eyes already brimming as though tears were a performance she had rehearsed. Martin followed, his shoulders stiff gaze scanning the corners of the room. Ryan lingered behind them, jaw tight, hands shoved into his pockets. Ava. Mom began, her voice cracking in just the right places we've been thinking. All of this lawyers' contracts, threats, it isn't who we are. We just want to make things right. I stayed seated, pen resting lightly across my palm. You already signed an agreement. That's what making it right looks like. Martin leaned forward, his elbows on the edge of the table. We were hoping for another way, something that feels more like family. We could give you the Scottsdale timeshare. You'd have a place for vacations. Fair trade. The words hung in the air. That property was worthless, tied up with liens I knew they couldn't pay. I didn't flinch. No. Ryan shifted, his voice rising. What about a retreat? We all go away for a week. No lawyers, no contracts, just talking it out like people who care about each other. I closed the binder on the table, the sound firm, but not loud. This isn't about vacations or retreats. It's about repayment. Anything else is a distraction. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, leaving neat smudges of mascara. We always planned to leave you more in the will, she whispered. That was how we intended to make it even. We never thought you'd keep records like this. For years, I had carried the name independent like it excused their choices. Now I heard it for what it was, a word that made me convenient, not cared for. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew 2 envelopes, sliding them across the table. Option 1. I said evenly. Repayment in full with interest over 5 years. Option 2, criminal complaints. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. They're ready to file. Ryan shoved his chair back with a loud scrape. You'd put your own family in prison. They made that choice when they stole from me, I answered. Martin's fingers drummed a restless rhythm against the table, then fell still. Mom's hand trembled as she picked up the first envelope, opening it slowly, as though the words inside might change with the air. Ryan stayed standing, fists clenched at his sides. Lauren entered, then her heels quiet against the wood floor, her briefcase tucked neatly under one arm. She gave me a small nod before setting a folder down beside me. We've confirmed additional accounts, she said, opened in Ava's name without authorization. The bank manager provided affidavits. They strengthen our case. The color drained from Martin's face. Mom folded the tissue tightly between her fingers. Ryan muttered something under his breath, but no one answered. Lauren's voice stayed calm, steady. This is no longer a matter of family disagreement. It is a matter of law. Ava is extending you the opportunity to settle privately. I recommend you consider it. The room went still, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then slowly, Mom lifted the pen and signed the repayment contract. Dad followed his strokes, sharp and deliberate. Ryan hesitated, his jaw working, but at last he scrawled his name across the line. The sound of their pens scratching against paper was the only movement in the room. When the last page was signed, I closed the folder with a quiet snap. They stood leaving in silence. No hugs, no promises, no performance. Just the sound of the door clicking shut behind them. I looked across the table at Lauren. She gave a brief, satisfied nod. Maddie began to gather the papers, her hands quick and sure. The evening light stretched across the floor, long and golden, washing the room in a clarity I hadn't known before. It was the turning point I had waited for, the moment when power no longer sat on their side of the table. The first repayment arrived in a cream-colored envelope, my mother's handwriting precise on the front. Inside was a check for $3,500 and a note with only 2 words. "We're sorry. No explanations, no excuses." I placed the check in a folder marked restitution and left the note tucked beside it. The ink felt heavier than its size, as if the words had taken more effort than the signature beneath. Not long after Lauren called with an update. Ryan's house had been listed as a short sale. My parents' Cadillac and the boat my father loved to polish each summer were gone sold to cover debts. They were moving into a senior apartment complex on the edge of town, trading square footage and a lake view for a 2-bedroom unit with linoleum floors. Her tone was calm, but the details settled deep. Chelsea called the next day, her voice carrying a quiet relief. The first payment for the Florida property had reached her account. Years of watching her share slip through the cracks were finally being answered by installments she could trace to the dollar. "It's not about the money," she said. "It's about being seen." The same afternoon, Maddie arrived with a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a brass key on a leather fob, cool and solid in my hand. "For your new beginning," she said. I had closed on the house I once lost in Maple Ridge this time, without loans, inspections, or conditions. The keys were mine alone, and the house stood waiting free of strings. When I stepped through the door for the first time, sunlight poured across hardwood floors, catching on the built-in shelves and the stone path outside where the maples arched overhead. I ran my fingers across the grain of the oak table left behind the wood, warm beneath my hand. The rooms echoed with quiet, but it wasn't the strained silence of family dinners. It was peace. That evening I hosted a small gathering. Maddie brought potted herbs for the kitchen window. Chelsea arrived with a hand-woven blanket, and Lauren carried a bottle of scotch that caught the light in amber tones. We sat around the fireplace as dusk fell, the fire snapping softly. The mantel held a single frame, a printout of the family karma audit with the words, "Account settled," written boldly across the bottom. "To chosen family," Maddie said, raising her glass. "To independence," Chelsea added. "To boundaries with consequences," Lauren said with quiet satisfaction. I lifted my own glass and looked around at them. To freedom. The sound of our glasses meeting carried through the room, a single clear note that lingered in the air. We spoke of work, of plans, of small joys. No voices overlapped to cover another. No words were twisted into weight. For the first time in years, I felt the circle around me steady and sure. Later, after they left, I carried my glass down to the dock. The lake stretched wide, the water holding the last light of the setting sun. I sat with my feet just above the surface, the cool air brushing my skin. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the old country song ringtone, humming faintly. Mom's name glowed on the screen. I silenced it and set the phone beside me, the music replaced by the quiet ripple of water against the dock posts. The weight I had carried between my shoulders for years was gone. The independence they had used as reason to take had become the very thing that freed me. I breathed in the cedar-scented air, the night falling calm and sure. The days after our gathering at the house carried a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the uneasy silence I had once lived inside waiting for the next demand or slight. It was a stillness that felt earned, a calm built from boundaries no one else could set for me. I moved through my mornings with a steadier rhythm, coffee on the porch, emails without distraction, long walks beneath the maples in the evening. A week later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The return address was a senior complex across town. Inside was a short note in my father's handwriting. He admitted they had sold the Cadillac, the boat, and even the club membership he had once considered untouchable. His words were few, written in the stiff hand of a man who had lost ground he thought permanent. Tucked inside was a copy of the repayment schedule, each box checked for the first month. It was the first time I had seen him keep a promise on paper. Not long after I received another envelope, this one from my mother. The handwriting was neater, almost practiced. She wrote about smaller rooms, shared hallways, and learning to cook on an electric stove. She didn't ask for forgiveness, only said she hoped I was comfortable in the house I had wanted for so long. At the bottom, she had signed her name without flourish, the ink lighter than usual. For years her words had come wrapped in expectation. These came plain, and that was enough. Ryan's silence stretched the longest. Weeks passed with no calls, no messages, no news. Then Chelsea called one evening. She had run into Sam at the market. Sam had told her the house was gone, the short sale closed, and Ryan was living in a rental outside town. Chelsea didn't add more, only said she thought I should know. I thanked her, then sat for a long time by the window, watching the lake catch the fading light. Some bridges fall quiet, not from choice, but from weight they can't carry anymore. In the middle of all this, life kept moving. Maddie helped me plant herbs in the kitchen window, their fresh scent curling into the morning air. Lauren brought updates on the legal side, each one smaller than the last, as accounts closed and balances shifted toward zero. Chelsea came by often, her laughter filling corners that had once echoed, and Ruth visited with her steady wisdom, reminding me that the hardest part of justice isn't gathering the proof, it's deciding what to do once you've won. One afternoon, I carried a box of framed photos down to the dock. The Christmas pictures, the birthdays, the posed vacations, all the moments where my smile had looked real on the surface but felt hollow underneath. I laid them out one by one, remembering not the faces, but the weight behind them. Then I slipped them back into the box and set it aside. They weren't gone, but they no longer held me. The house slowly became mine in more than deed. I painted the walls with colors I loved, filled shelves with books I had saved for years, and let the rooms breathe without pretending. Each space carried only what I chose. The maples outside the window shifted from green to amber, the same trees that had once shaded a dream I thought I had lost. Now they shaded something different, a life I had built and defended on my own terms. As autumn deepened, the repayments continued to arrive. The numbers didn't matter as much as the acknowledgement. Each check was less about the balance and more about the line it carried, proof that what was taken could no longer be ignored. And with each one, the past felt a little less heavy. I still don't know what shape my relationship with my parents will take in the years ahead. What I do know is that the word independent no longer sits like a wound. It belongs to me now, not as an excuse they used, but as a truth I chose. Independence isn't isolation. It's freedom to decide who belongs at your table and who doesn't. The night before Thanksgiving, I stood on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, the lake calm beneath the stars. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. This time, I didn't even look at the screen. I let it rest there unanswered while the wind moved softly through the trees. Justice had come not with vengeance, but with clarity. I had learned that love without respect is hollow, that generosity without boundaries is a debt waiting to be written, and that strength only matters when you choose to use it. If you've ever carried the weight of being called strong just so others could lean harder, I hope you find the courage to set your own terms. Independence doesn't mean going without. It means walking free. Thank you for listening to my story. Share your thoughts in the comments if it touched something in your own life, and don't forget to subscribe so you can join me for the next one.